10,000 Mongol warriors sailed toward Japan, their armored hulls gleaming like sharpened bone beneath a sky black with promise. Their orders, delivered from Kublai Khan himself, echo with terrifying simplicity: annihilate, dominate, make the islands kneel before the great Khan. When they arrive at Hakata Bay, a mere 1,000 samurai stand against the coming storm, their katanas catching the last light of what many believe will be their final sunset, eyes burning not with fear but with terrible purpose. The numbers prophesy slaughter. The Mongols should crush this resistance like an insect beneath a war horse's hoof. But this is not a story of numbers. This is a story of resolve scalded into steel, of samurai who have written death poems but refuse to recite them, of a war cry that will be swallowed by something more terrible than any human voice. How do 1,000 warriors face certain annihilation without breaking? And what unspeakable force dares intervene when the world's mightiest army stretches its hand toward conquest? This is the divine wind that saved Japan, the kamikaze that turned history on its edge. But the churning clouds are not the only thing that will bleed across these sacred shores. The year is 1274. Japan exists in fragments, its clans locked in blood feuds and vendettas that span generations. But now, every blade points toward a common horizon. The threat materializes across the churning sea. An empire that consumed the endless steppes, brought mighty China to its knees, and turns its ravenous gaze eastward. The Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan, heir to Genghis Khan's terrifying legacy, has united more territory under a single banner than any power in human history. These are not mere raiders, but architects of devastation, their ranks filled with conquered generals, Chinese siege engineers, Korean conscripts, and weapons that spew liquid fire across battlefields. For the samurai, combat is sacred ritual, a dance of honor between individual warriors. For the Mongols, war is methodical obliteration, where thunder erupts not from heavens, but from synchronized cavalry movements and pulsing war drums that herald death. The Japanese understand what approaches their shores. In the mountain-shadowed sanctuary of Dazaifu, Samurai Takezaki Suenaga presses brush to parchment, not in prayer, but in solemn vow. If these sacred islands fall, they will fall over his lifeless body, his face pressed into soil soaked with the blood of invaders who dared believe Japan would surrender. Suenaga stands in full armor beneath the flickering light of pine torches, his chest plate a lacquered void that consumes all light, his helm contorted into the snarl of a Tengu demon meant to shatter enemy courage before steel meets flesh. Around him, samurai gather in predatory stillness, each warrior forged through 10,000 cuts, through knuckles split on sword hilts, through meditation beneath icy waterfalls, where the mind learns to embrace suffering as companion. The War Council exchanges no wasted words, no posturing, no fear. The enemy outnumbers them tenfold, a fact acknowledged with the same gravity as the coming dawn. Their focus narrows to what they can control: terrain, timing, the purity of their resolve. Maps of Hakata Bay spread before them, marked with stones and slivers of polished bone to indicate death grounds where the Mongol numerical advantage will mean nothing. Their strategy crystallizes. They will become the tempest rather than weather it, striking from shallows where foreign boots struggle for purchase, unleashing precise violence before dissolving into the landscape they know intimately as their own skin. In their veins runs not just blood, but centuries of belief that to fall defending these sacred shores transforms death into immortality. Suenaga's hands tremble as he traces the coastline where tomorrow's slaughter will baptize the sand, not from terror of what approaches, but from the crushing weight of ancestry, the eyes of 1,000 years watching to see if he proves worthy. The gods have gone silent, waiting. And across the darkening sea, Mongol ships advance like inevitability itself, their sails pregnant with a wind that seems, for now, to favor conquest. Miles away, aboard the flagship adorned with imperial dragons, General Liu Fuxiang studies charts with unblinking concentration, lamplight casting violent shadows across his weather-carved face. Born under the Khan's banner but forged through 100 sieges across Asia, Liu is no barbarian raider but a mathematician of slaughter who converts human flesh into calculated victory. He measures conquest in heartbeats, blood volumes, the precise angle where morale shatters against overwhelming force. He views the samurai as magnificent anachronisms, warriors clinging to ritual honor while the world advances beneath Mongol innovation and Chinese engineering. Yet respect tempers his confidence. He has absorbed every intelligence report, tales of single combatants carving paths through infantry formations, of warriors who kneel before death as if greeting an honored guest. They are fewer, this is undeniable. But Liu has witnessed cornered wolves tear through hunting parties 10 times their number. He issues commands in crisp Mongolian, his hand slicing the air like an executioner's blade. The plan crystallizing, a beach assault at first light, synchronized waves of archers creating killing fields, shield bearers forming impenetrable walls, siege engineers deploying weapons that will transform the Japanese shoreline into scorched memory. Not conquered, but erased. Yet as he steps from the strategy table to face the vast darkness beyond the ship's lanterns, an ancient disquiet ripples through his gut. Smoke spirals skyward above Hakata's pine-crowned cliffs, not from war preparations, but from thousands of incense sticks burning in synchronized prayer. The Mongols have their war machine, their tactical perfection. The Japanese have something that makes Liu's hand unconsciously tighten around his sword hilt. They have ancestors who whisper from beyond death, gods who demand blood sacrifice, warriors who transform defeat into horrifying glory. At dawn, the invasion begins. The first Mongol war drums thunder across Hakata Bay, shaking earth and bone, a sound engineered to break spirit before sword cleaves sinew. Liu Fuxiang watches from the command deck as the shoreline smolders beneath converging waves of troops, arrows sailing in black parabolas that blot out the morning sun. What awaits them should be a rout. But as the first wave stumbles onto the cramped beaches, chaos blooms instead of conquest. Hidden palisades erupt with fire-tipped arrows, samurai archers releasing in metronomic bursts from behind earthen walls, camouflaged beneath beach grass. A squadron of Mongol heavy infantry charges, forward only to vanish, screaming into spiked trenches disguised as shallow tide pools. From the pines, Suenaga emerges like a revenant, his sword catching sunlight as it severs limbs with terrifying precision, his battle cry carrying the weight of centuries, reverberating not just through enemy ranks, but through the very soil of his ancestors. The Mongols regroup with frightening speed, their battlefield coordination unmatched. But they face warriors who have transformed familiar terrain into a labyrinth of death. When a Mongol engineer ignites a fire lance, spitting liquid flame toward a samurai position, a shadow detaches from the cliffside above, a masked warrior plummeting with deliberate purpose, dragging both himself and the engineer into a shared cremation. Liu barks orders for a flanking maneuver, but the bay itself seems to resist. Hidden shoals, grasping ship hulls like skeletal fingers, while tides surge with uncanny strength. The Mongols have conquered emperors, fortresses, and deserts, but never a people who have made the landscape itself complicit in their desperate defense. And beyond the horizon, where morning calm once reigned, dark clouds now gather with unnatural speed, coiling like divine judgment made manifest. The kamikaze approaches, still unseen but already writing its terrible prophecy in the suddenly violent churn of waves. The storm does not arrive in silence. It screams, it drowns the world. What began as a disciplined assault transforms into a struggle not against samurai blades, but against nature's unleashed wrath. Mongol ships wrench free from their moorings as monstrous waves shatter their formations, masts twisting like snapped bone beneath winds that slice through armor and flesh alike. Seasoned warriors who conquered vast empires now clawed desperately at rain-slicked decks, fingers breaking against wood as the sea rises like a living creature seeking vengeance. Liu Fuxiang watches in horror as his meticulously planned invasion dissolves into chaos, his commands swallowed by the tempest's roar, his invincible fleet scattering like autumn leaves before wildfire. On shore, Suenaga drags wounded brothers through mud that sucks at their bodies like hungry spirits, his face carved with exhaustion, ancestral blood mingling with rain and seawater. In this moment, there are no enemies or allies, only mortals caught in divine fury, their ambitions rendered meaningless against heaven's judgment. By dawn's first light, Hakata Bay has become an alien landscape of destruction. Fragments of hull pierce the shoreline like broken ribs, shattered siege, weapons lie twisted beyond recognition, and bodies sway in the gentle aftermath, currents, tangled in torn rigging like offerings to an appeased god. The Mongol invasion force, which no human army could have stopped, lies decimated by invisible hands. At Dazaifu Shrine, Suenaga kneels in his salt-crusted armor, pressing brush to parchment with bleeding fingers to record what he has witnessed. The gods do not answer prayers. They wage war. But the wind does more than shred sails and devour fleets. It fractures the foundations of empire itself. Kublai Khan believed himself invincible, his mandate written in the stars, his dominion destined to stretch from Persian deserts to Korean forests and beyond. Now every splintered hull returning to Mongolia carries something more devastating than dead warriors. It carries doubt. What inconceivable power dares defy the great Khan? Whispers slither through the corridors of the Yuan court like venomous serpents, stories that Japan stands protected not by mortal men, but by vengeful gods, that the sea itself has declared these islands unconquerable. For years, Kublai Khan broods and plots, his humiliation festering into obsession. 7 years later, in 1281, he launches a second invasion with a fleet twice as large. 30,000 warriors carried on 4,000 vessels, enough to blot out the horizon. But the gods have not finished their judgment. Another typhoon materializes, more ferocious than the first, waves tall as mountains crushing ships like discarded toys, winds flaying flesh from bone. The Japanese name it kamikaze, divine wind, a word that will echo through centuries. Resurfacing 667 years later during another desperate hour when Japan again faces obliteration, when young warriors once more carve death poems on machines of steel before plunging from the sky. But it begins here with 1,000 samurai who refuse to accept annihilation as destiny, who stood at the edge of their world not praying for divine intervention but becoming its instrument. Their resolve so absolute it seemed to summon the heavens themselves to their cause. The storm saved Japan, but it was the unflinching defiance of those prepared to sacrifice everything that called the tempest down. Centuries later, in museums and temples across Japan, fragments remain, a splintered Mongol arrowhead encrusted with sea salt from Hakata Bay, a samurai helmet warped by liquid flame, Suenaga scrolls capturing the raw fury and transcendent awe of men facing annihilation. These relics speak not merely of divine wind, but of flesh and blood warriors who transformed hopeless resistance into immortality without seeking it. They tell of Liu Fuxiang, whose tactical brilliance dissolved not in failure, but in confrontation with forces beyond mortal calculation or control. They reveal how history pivots not on numerical advantage or strategic certainty, but on moments where individuals stand at the precipice between survival and extinguishment and make choices that reverberate through centuries. The kamikaze did not save Japan because gods favored one side. It manifested only after warriors had already chosen death over submission. Their resolve so unbreakable, it seemed to summon the heavens themselves as ally. Now beneath the churning waters of Hakata Bay lie countless bones, fragments of vessels and rusted weapons, physical remnants of an impossible confrontation slumbering in darkness, waiting silently until necessity summons another divine wind to these sacred shores. And yet, the bones do not weep, they whisper. Each tide that breaks upon the shoreline carries their memory in salt and foam, a message passed to generations who may never lift a sword, yet walk beneath the shadows of those who did. Children play where warriors died, their laughter echoing across the same cliffs from which the storm was first sighted. In quiet rituals and imperceptible gestures, a bow to the sea, a whispered name before battle, a hand lingering on a lacquered sword hilt, the legacy endures like breath. For history is not written in ink alone, but etched into wind-scoured rock and passed through blood. The fishermen of Hakata cast their nets where Mongol and samurai bodies once drifted, their calloused hands working waters that once ran red, now sanctified by sacrifice. Beneath these tranquil waves, a single shattered war mask lies half-buried in silt, its demonic Tengu visage eroded by centuries, yet still poised mid-roar, face forever turned toward the horizon. Not a relic of terror, but of defiance, a silent sentinel guarding against all who would reach too far across these waters. It stands testament to the moment when the world's greatest army learned that some shores cannot be conquered. Some spirits cannot be broken, not by overwhelming force or tactical brilliance, but shattered against the immovable resolve of those who chose to become the very storm that saved them. So the next time you hear wind howling through cedar trees or feel the sea mist kiss your skin near Hakata Bay, listen carefully for the voices beneath. 1,000 years later, the legacy pulses through the earth itself, carrying the memory of warriors who met impossible odds, not with despair, but with sharpened will and sacred fury. The Mongols brought fire, steel, and overwhelming numbers, their confidence born from conquered continents. The samurai brought intimate knowledge of their shores, meticulous preparation, and a readiness to die standing rather than live kneeling. Yet what ultimately carved this story into the soul of a nation was not simply courage against superior force, but the mysterious convergence of human resolve and natural power, as if the land itself recognized those willing to bleed for it. Not a divine miracle granted freely, but a terrible gift earned through sacrifice. And somewhere beneath those churning waters still lies that single war mask, its mouth eternally open in defiance, a silent guardian waiting to be summoned again should history dare test the edge of Japan's resolve. The divine wind may sleep through centuries of peace, but it never forgets those who first called it into being, those who transformed defeat into legend through the simple, devastating refusal to surrender what was sacred. And so the storm passes, yet its echo resonates through the centuries, deeper than thunder and longer than legend. What endures is not the tempest itself, but the warriors who stood before it, faces lifted not in supplication, but in resolute challenge. Their individual names may fade from memory, but their collective defiance has carved itself into the very soul of a nation. Today, the kamikaze is more than just a historical wind. It is a living symbol, a pulse that beats beneath centuries of Japanese consciousness, a whispered reminder that there exist pivotal moments when human resolve can shape reality itself, when the boundaries between myth and memory dissolve into something transcendent. That solitary Tengu mask continues its silent vigil from beneath the waves, half buried in silt and caressed by currents, its demonic snarl undiminished by the relentless passage of time. It does not merely rest, it remains vigilant, waiting not for renewed conflict or vengeance, but for those inevitable moments when a people must again decide whether to bend before overwhelming force or transform themselves into an immovable cornerstone of resistance. For it is not the wind that ultimately determines the fate of nations, it is human will crystallized into action. And if you stand at the shores of Hakata Bay during the hushed twilight between crashing waves, you might still perceive the collective breath before the samurai charged toward certain death. The final battle cry before divine winds shattered an empire's ambition and the unspoken sacred oath that forged the terrible, beautiful miracle that became Japan. It ends not with triumph, but with hallowed silence. Rain purifies the earth as night reclaims the ash-choked beaches, washing away blood but preserving memory in every grain of sand. The Mongols return across the sea in rupture and shame, carrying tales of supernatural vengeance, while Japan emerges transformed, its fractured clans bound by shared survival against impossible odds. The storm did not merely repel invaders, it rewrote the national soul, fusing disparate identities into collective purpose. Through generations, this tale passes in whispers beside temple fires, in battle scrolls studied by candlelight, in meticulously etched swords handed from father to son, in the charged stillness before a sumo match begins or a blade slides from its scabbard in ceremony. The kamikaze becomes both caution and conviction, a visceral oath carried forward through centuries of war, peace, occupation, and resurrection. In moments when foreign powers again threatened Japanese shores, warriors would feel the pressure of ancestral hands upon their shoulders, hear phantom war drums beneath crashing waves. For the divine wind is not a blessing freely granted, but a covenant forged through blood sacrifice and unbreakable resolve, something earned rather than summoned. And somewhere, still in the depth beneath Hakata Bay, that single Tengu mask waits in silt-covered vigilance, its jaws eternally fixed mid-roar, a guardian ready to rise whenever sacred shores face desecration, reminding any who forget that Japan belongs not to conquerors, but to those who stand unbroken where even gods once paused to listen. So ends the tale of 1,000 who faced 10,000, not with pleading but with poised blades and unwavering hearts. Their story, bracketed by thunder and sealed in the salt of their homeland, outlives even memory. Japan was not saved by myth alone, nor did gods descend upon the battlefield with blazing swords. Instead, the storm arrived because warriors first chose to stand, to bleed, to believe when surrender seemed inevitable. Steel met flesh, wind tore empire, and silence crowned sacrifice. In that brief, cataclysmic convergence of human defiance and elemental wrath, history turned its face toward the samurai, and they carved their legacy into every future heartbeat of their nation. They were not merely warriors, but the axis upon which an unfathomable moment turned when the mightiest empire on earth recoiled from shores deemed unconquerable. This is not legend. This is what happens when mortal resolve crystallizes into something transcendent, when death becomes devotion, when a single defiant roar from 1,000 souls makes the heavens themselves answer. The storm passed, but Japan remained, its soil sanctified by sacrifice, its spirit tempered in that impossible crucible where ordinary men and women became the embodiment of divine intervention through their refusal to surrender what they held sacred. Now the winds lie still, the storm long past, but across the stone paths of Shinto shrines and the silent sands of Hakata's shore, its story endures in breathless reverence. The kamikaze is no longer just wind, no longer just weather, but a sacred memory stitched into Japan's marrow, a visceral testament that a people willing to stand to the last can alter even nature's course. In classrooms and barracks, in pilgrimages to sun-bleached memorials facing the sea, the tale is passed not as war story, but as ritual, a binding between ancestors and future defenders. Fishermen cast nets where armored bodies once drifted, their weathered hands performing gestures of respect before disturbing these hallowed waters. Farmers till soil enriched by sacrifice, knowing each grain that grows carries forward an inheritance of defiance. And deep below, beneath layers of silt and centuries, that Tengu mask rests undisturbed, its snarl muted by time but undiminished in power, waiting not for battle but remembrance. Because the greatest legacy of those 1,000 warriors is not that they won, it is that through resolve so pure it bent the elements, they taught the world this truth, that even against the vast machinery of empire, there can rise a human will so uncompromising, so precise, so ablaze with purpose, it becomes indistinguishable from a force of nature. And in the silence after the storm, that truth still whispers like wind across the waves, eternal and unbroken. So if one day you stand before the sea at Hakata Bay, where the winds taste ancient and the horizon bears the burden of memory, know that you are not alone. Beneath your feet lies more than sand, it is sacred testimony. Every gust that rakes through the pines, every hush between crashing waves, carries the breath of warriors who once stood surrounded and unyielding. Their story is carved in salt, sung in wind, and etched in the bone of a nation that remembers not just the storm, but the souls who summoned it. The 1,000 samurai do not ask for reverence or pity. In their silence, they offer this final truth: the storm that saved Japan did not descend from the heavens. It was called forth by those who, staring into annihilation, chose instead to become something eternal. And in doing so, they proved to the world that even the greatest empire can be halted, not by strength alone, but by the unshakable will of those who will not bow. The legend ends, but the wind remains, waiting always for remembrance, for resolve, for the moment it may be needed again. And as sunrise burns through the mist above Hakata Bay one final time, it reveals not just the tide-worn battleground of centuries past, but the enduring shape of human will pressed into the land itself. Tourists walk unwittingly over the footprints of warriors. School children recite prayers in shrines where gods once listened with terrible attention. The storm has passed, the empire it shattered now long buried by time, but the lesson carved into every gust remains unchanged. When the moment comes, when the dark horizon once again brims with overwhelming force, it will not be forgotten how 1,000 hearts once beat in unison, unshaken by numerical odds or certainty of defeat, and how that rhythm summoned a wind that still lingers, rustling leaves, shifting waves, whispering through Japan's soul. Stand, not merely as defense, but as testament that some shores cannot be conquered by any empire, no matter how vast, when those who guard them have already accepted death as merely the first step toward becoming immortal. And so the wind fades, but the oath does not. The 1,000 samurai are dust now, their armor devoured by rust, their names eroded from stone. Yet their stand endures, not as myth but marrow, encoded into the quiet discipline of archers on twilight ranges, into the shrine maidens sweeping fallen leaves where ash once carpeted bloodied ground, into the watchful silence of coastlines that remember. Hakata Bay looks ordinary now, peaceful even, but beneath its glassy surface lies a wound transformed into sacred bone, a memory so vast it reshapes the present. This is not the end of their story, only its final breath, coursing through the veins of a nation forged in that crucible. For what saved Japan was not a miracle torn from the sky, but the terrible, deliberate sacrifice of warriors who transformed certain death into immortality. When you walk these wind-blown shores they defended, listen closely to the whispers carried on the breeze, feel the weight of countless eyes watching from beyond time, waiting in vigilant slumber, ready to rise when resolve once again burns fierce enough to summon the divine wind.